swallowed the red pill back in 2008 and began reporting the news in front of a camera in 2019. In that time, we've seen a complete upheaval in world politics. The battle lines have changed between the illusion of left versus right to the reality of globalism versus nationalism. Despite all the information, the truth and the lies, there are two very distinct pathways emerging. Should we follow Labor and Liberal to a dystopic one-world government, or do we fight for our nationalism, unlock our hidden resources wealth and build a new Australia? With the world teetering on a knife's edge, should we solidify our relationship with the USA and become the 51st state? This is my mission statement here on Australian National Review, and I welcome you to Black Pill me as hard as you can as we determine our future together. This is the 51st state. Hello and welcome to the 51st State, the only show anywhere, I believe, that is challenging what we know as Australians by looking around the world, particularly to the US, and wondering if we can take valuable lessons and perhaps even change the way we do business in Australia in relation to ourselves and how it is that we strive for a better future, but somehow the downward trajectory just won't change. Why is that? For all the extra money, the resources, the study, the knowledge, the technology, we're going backwards, not forwards. And when we look around the world and consider politics, the show business of ugly people, what if we look at show business itself and realize that that's just as bad as the politics as well? Well, today's show, we are going to challenge norms once again and likely realize that the more we learn, the more we realize we don't know. But that doesn't mean you stop inquiry, because ignorance is no answer to anything. And in today's show, I'll introduce you to my guest just after the break, Dr. John Brady, forensic psychologist. We are in for a treat, and we're going to challenge the grey matter as we explore reasons why people who you wouldn't expect would behave in certain ways do. Don't go anywhere. You're watching the 51st State.
Australian National Review is Australia's first real free and independent press. One with no editorial control by the elite, but a publication that can generate critical thinkers and critical debate, and hold those spreading mistruths and deliberate propaganda in mainstream media to account. News with a difference that will be educational, compelling, and create a platform for political and social change in this country, and address the real issues facing this country and the world.
And welcome back to the 51st State. My guest for this hour is Dr. John Brady. As both a California licensed forensic psychologist and doctor of criminology from Berkeley, Dr. Brady brings a unique blend of professional knowledge and over a quarter of a century of experience. Whether it be impulse control disorders, including sexual molestation and shoplifting, have all been central areas of Dr. Brady's professional attention. And he's gone a whole lot further with a new book, or two new books, one on the killers officially of RFK in Sirhan Sirhan, and also looking at Lee Harvey Oswald and the patterns between these two 24-year-olds. But it gets a whole lot deeper than that. Dr. John Brady, welcome to the 51st State.
Oh, thank you, the 51st State. You know, it's my pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you on the show, John. And tell you what, we are, look, as I said in the opening, the more we learn, the more we realize we just don't know. And so your business, over a quarter of a century, exploring what's happening in the in the crazy world of crime, criminology. You've explored celebrity. You've explored RFK's murder, JFK, these characters, and I'm just wondering, how do we get to the bottom of the common threads that you're discovering? And because we're going to talk about the Unabomber, we're going to talk about the recent Luigi Maglione case. There's just so much going on. What are you discovering in terms of common threads here?
Well, thank you for the question, and I think that's really the bottom line is what are the commonalities that we can find out between that shared by certain kinds of criminals. For example, when I looked at the case of Sirhan Sirhan versus Lee Harvey Oswald, I saw that there were more psychiatric similarities than dissimilarities, going back to their original original time that these particular needs developed in their behavior, which was around age 13. They both experienced severe traumatic situations. Lee Harvey Oswald with his mother, who was a very strange person that helped infuse a lot of antisocial behavior into his personality. And Sirhan Sirhan, who was till age 13, he was in East Palestine, where there was violence, very similar to what's happening now in Gaza. Very similar, strikingly similar conditions to the mayhem, murder, and violence. So with both of them at an early age, they developed a kind of an alternate view of the world based on their own traumatic experiences that they had at this early age.
So a traumatic experience at 13 manifests and leads someone over a decade later to want to be involved with changing history. I mean, it's an incredible leap because RFK, I mean, the fact that his son, RFK Jr., is now part of an administration dealing with health today, like also the biggest picture, he wants to make America healthy again. You can't ask for more than that. It's the magnitude, John, that just beggars belief. Exactly. But the magnitude of this thing. So how does a 13-year-old, through a relationship with the mother, I mean, we've seen this. We've seen it in The Manchurian Candidate, Angela Lansbury, the movie. This is a real thing. So what we're trying to unpack here, I suppose, is if it could be manufactured. Are these characters identified as 13-year-olds and then put into some sort of program? I mean, how do you unpack this when you're delivered this information up front? Where would you start, for example?
No, I don't think that the Manchurian Candidate, of course, is a fictionalized version of a created, externally created robotic individual who is pre-programmed to engage in a particular behavior based on some post-hypnotic suggestion or clinical cue. Although I have seen, Jason, here's the bottom line question. Is there or are there research studies that show that people can act against their own free will and engage in behaviors, not necessarily homicidal behaviors as in the Sirhan case and the Oswald case, but is there any evidence that we can marshal that shows that a person can be convinced to act against their will to do something? There is a lot of research concerning this real aspect, not the fictionalized two movies and the books by Marx on the Manchurian Candidate, but there are real studies that I have seen, written, and know the people who conducted the research that demonstrates that through clever hypnotic age regression, through certain kinds of hypnoanalytic techniques, you can get somebody to do something which is against their will. In the Sirhan case, as I mentioned before, I think he was a self-hypnotized individual who had taken his vengeance out on RFK because of his allegiance to Israel. Sirhan being a inveterate Palestinian, supporting his Palestinian people, wanting to be the savior of the Palestinians. So he creates this particular alternate personality, which is infused with all the bad things that he has seen and acquired over the years. This drifts into what's called identification with the aggressor. And this is a very important concept because psychiatrically, the identification with the aggressor that was identified by Anna Freud, Freud's youngest daughter, who was also an analyst, she looked at some of the pathologies of people in the concentration camps, the Jewish prisoners, and she noticed that a lot of those people had identified with the enemy. They tried to fashion Nazi uniforms. They had little pieces of cloth that they tried to look like a Nazi officer. So there was this maladaptive behavior for certain kinds of people, Jews in the concentration camps, and they were called capos, that they identified highly with the aggressor. With Sirhan, he identified highly with the aggressive people who he experienced when he was 10, let's say 8 to 10 to 12 years old in Palestine, which was the British Mandate troops, the Israeli troops, not Israeli at the time, but Jewish troops at the time. He witnessed unbelievable scenes of terror, mayhem, murder, and slaughter that helped him create this alternate personality that, instead of escaping from, subconsciously he identified with it, and he created the second personality. As I said before, we were talking, there's at least 4 other doctors who agree with this particular diagnosis of, let's just call it a multiple personality at the time, 1968 and 1969, that he had created this multiple personality that's infused with all the bad things that he sees around him. And that in turn, the trigger later becomes Robert Kennedy as the focal point of his aggression and anger towards the displaced anger towards the Jewish population. As I said before, also, Sirhan created an enemies list. He had other people on there: General Edwin Walker, the kind of discredited general that was living in New Orleans, Arthur Goldberg, another Jewish leader who was the ambassador to the UN. So he had diffused his anger against the Jews onto other people besides just RFK, who wasn't Jewish, but he represented, in Sirhan's mind, he represented the Jewish evilness to try and suppress the Palestinians. So the Manchurian Candidate idea, in my mind, is certainly valid and representative to the viewpoint that you can create a self-described, a self-motivated Manchurian Candidate. And in Sirhan's case, it came as the second personality, which, interestingly enough, wasn't identified by his ordinary personality. So he had 2 distinct personalities running parallel to each other, one which was the positive personality, the ordinary personality that my advisor called the regular, not diffused or not disassociated personality, along with the evil personality that had all this hatred towards the Jews.
Just checking there on his date of birth. So 1944, Sirhan is born. So Israel becomes a state in 1948. So he's a 4-year-old boy. By 68, he takes out RFK as a 24-year-old. I'm just trying
Correct.
to get a sort of a picture in the exploration, therefore, of his upbringing and the trauma caused by the creation of the State of Israel, for example. Was that researched in part of understanding the background there for going down the pathway of this disgruntled Palestinian and taking his anger out on the Kennedys?
Oh yes, I mean in my book I list the traumatic events in his life, and there's almost too many to go into. One of which involved his brother being killed, and he saw his brother die, being run over by a military truck. He saw bodies that were dismembered. He saw a good family friend that was just blown up by a roadside bomb. He saw women that were butchered and half dead. He saw bodies strewn about. So this contributed to this repeated trauma contributed to his complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD, which he also developed along with the multiple personality that originally was done as a safe spot for him. But as he conditioned himself, he began to assume this identification with the aggressor, Anna Freud's work, and he became a latent killer, a latent individual imbued with all of these negative factors. And the expression of those factors were realized, as you aptly point out, 10 years later, 11 years later in his case, when he was 24 years old. So it's the cumulative trauma, it's the complex trauma situation. It's his creating this alternate personality that was not just an artifactual situation. It was verified. It was tested. It was evidenced by at least three psychologists plus Dr. Diamond, who was my advisor. The bottom line with the case is what everything that could go wrong in that case did go wrong. Put it that way. That the defense that Dr. Diamond promulgated during the trial was so difficult for the jury to understand that Dr. Diamond did a modified defense that revolved around diminished capacity. I don't know if they have that in Australia or not, but there's a lot of parallel criminal law between the common law in England and in Australian law and U.S. law, specifically California law. So at the time, diminished capacity was a valid defense, which doesn't exculpate Sirhan from murdering Robert Kennedy, but it lessens his responsibility based on the negation of malice aforethought based on his psychiatric symptomatologies at the time. Dr. Diamond felt that the jury was it was a long trial all the way from January till April of '69. Dr. Diamond felt that the jury was being perceived this as psychobabble. They couldn't understand it. So the full expression of the diminished capacity defense really wasn't realized, and it left Sirhan in kind of an indefensible position because he wasn't a very sympathetic defendant in defending his own self-interest, particularly because he left behind a long diary filled with diatribes concerning murder, acting out, RFK must die, and other incriminating evidence that should have never been entered as evidence in the first place, because this diary was taken without a valid warrant. It was taken without permission from his brother. He was living at his mother and his brother. The brother had no right to divulge this information. The information was then conveyed, of course, to the prosecution, who was salivating and excited that here, now we have the smoking gun, literally two smoking guns, one in the Ambassador Hotel and the other in the pages of this long, elongated diary where there's all these incriminating statements concerning, I want to kill Kennedy. Kennedy must die. RFK must die. He must be rubbed out. So as I said, the prosecution was very excited about this piece of evidence. They introduced it, and it should have never been introduced. It should have been excluded as being not obtained with a valid search warrant. The irony or the twist of the statements made in the diary is that the defense thought, well, maybe let me back up. The prosecution wanted to enter several pages from this diary as evidence that Sirhan had premeditation, malice aforethought, that he thought about this crime, he planned it, and he killed his victim. The defense thought, well, this is a really good idea. Why don't we present the entire diary to the jury and show that only a person who is mentally disabled, has a mental defect, a psychiatric disorder, would leave such information. This was a crazy response by his own defense team to allow the diary in its entirety to be entered as evidence against the person they're trying to defend. In the end, based on the notion of diminished capacity, the charge should have been second-degree murder, which negates malice aforethought, and he would have been paroled 40 years ago. But he still sits in a California state prison in San Diego 58 years later with no recourse, particularly with a governor that has disallowed him parole.
It's incredible. It's an incredible story because RFK Jr. himself argues a completely different perspective. He doesn't even think that that Sirhan even pulled the trigger in this situation, and that on its own is extraordinary. Have you explored that?
Got to read my epilogue.
We're going to have to.
You got to read the epilogue in the book, Jason, and you'll get, Paul Harvey, you'll get the rest of the story.
Well, I'm just putting up on screen there, Psychological DNA, a cold case analysis of who killed Robert
right.
F. Kennedy.
So here's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
RFK Jr. decides that he wants to interview Sirhan himself in San Diego in the Donovan Detention Center, California State Institution. So he arranges, along with his movie star wife, to go down to San Diego. She stays in the car. RFK Jr. interviews Sirhan for several hours, and he comes out with the viewpoint later that he was quoted in the newspapers as saying something similar to what you said, but not exactly. So RFK Jr. then says that he doesn't think that Sirhan fired the fatal bullet. He didn't preclude the 8 other shots that injured 5 people severely, almost killed the man standing next to, on the other side of RFK, and then 4 other people, plus 3 shots to RFK Jr.'s father. So he doesn't think that the fatal shot, which was an occipital shot in the back of the head, Sirhan was standing in front of him in this position with his loaded gun. He discharged 8 bullets. 5 people were injured. Kennedy was hit with 3 of them. I think 1 went through his sport coat jacket or something. RFK Jr. argues that the person standing next to him, the security guard who was just hired for this particular event, that he unholstered his .38 caliber gun. Sirhan's was a .22 caliber gun loaded with 8 hollow point long rifle shots. RFK Jr. thinks that he shot his father in this area here, whereas they are standing face to face with each other. Thomas Noguchi, the famous pathologist to the stars, he says the only way he drew a physical picture of what he thought happened in terms of physics, and he thought that the fatal bullet could have been fired by Sirhan as Kennedy's body rotated from the force of the other three bullets. So his body is rotating towards Sirhan, and he fires this bullet. Okay, so that's the story. RFK Jr. thinks that the security guard who's standing on his right side, he took his gun and he fired the fatal bullet that killed him. So RFK Jr., he begins a negotiation with the security guard. This is just a few years ago. It's not ancient history. He begins a negotiation with the security guard to say, what's up with this? What happened? Can you remember? Let's get together. We'll have a Foster's or two, and we'll relax, and I'll get the rest of the story. So the security guard, Thane Eugene Caesar is his name. He says, yeah, that's okay, but I need a little money in order to tell you the real story. So he wants $25,000 from RFK Jr. to tell the rest of the story. For some reason, RFK Jr. Rebuffs this offer, which was a mistake, I think, in retrospect. He says it's too much. He's not going to do it. So that kind of ends the negotiations. And then the Caesar then disappears from Southern California, goes to the Philippines, and the next thing he's dead.
Wow.
So RFK Jr. is not going to get the story that he could have gotten, although Caesar could have lied. I mean, he had no reason to lie. He was never charged. But there were some facts in evidence that were cloudy concerning what happened to the gun that he had. He did own a .22 caliber gun. It was sold later. The Sirhan's was a .22. This guy carried a .38. There is some anecdotal, very, very light anecdotal information that somebody saw him draw his service revolver. This is a story that RFK Jr. is never going to get. The only thing we can do, as you said in your introduction, what can we see? How can we fit these pieces together? You can fit the pieces together by looking at the psychiatric information, looking at the anecdotal experience by all witnesses and people. These are important people, but they're not infallible. So the coroner, Thomas Noguchi, comes up with the final decision that it was the physical movement of the body that seemed to produce this last and fatal wound.
And for the security guard,
right,
to Caesar, to then say, well, I'll tell you the real story, indicates something else. But surely the bullet fragment or the bullet sizing or something that's gone into RFK's neck or head is the giveaway. What was the forensic evidence there?
22.
So it was a 22 all along.
But there's always. I mean, I'm not a ballistics expert, so there's always difference of opinion when a bullet is fragmented. So if it strikes a certain bone, if it depending on the angle of the bullet, it could be distorted. It could have passed through. I mean, there's a lot of other explanations concerning what the ballistics of the situation were, and then what the logistics of the situation as he stood in front of that marquee stand that said Ambassador Hotel, and behind that was was Caesar, that escorted him through the hotel, through into the pantry, and seemed to be helpful. Whether or not when the firing started, he pulled his gun out and shot, I don't see any evidence of that. But it's not impossible. You're dealing with probabilities and educated guesses as to what really happened. My thrust was how did he get in front of the senator with a loaded gun? What led him to be there? What pieces of his background, what threads can we connect that get him there? Whether it's the Rosicrucians, whether it's the trauma, whether it's the complex PTSD, whether it's his obsession with the Palestinians and what he thinks Kennedy is going to do against the Palestinians. All those factors have to be quantified into one unified theory that hangs together and makes sense as a explanation rather than a description. Most of these conspiracies, and he was sequestered, he was taken away from his house. That's all descriptive information and highly interesting, but there is no proof that he was sequestered, taken to one theory says he was sequestered, taken to a military hospital, and he was conditioned to become a programmed robotic killer. The evidence on MK Ultra research is, if possible, is so involved, so intense, involving so many different modalities of mental conversion. You mentioned the white light, very plausible. The studies conducted by the serious people who engaged in MK Ultra type research, and that's what we're talking about, such as Ewan Cameron, such as Jocelyn West in Southern California, such as some of the professors that I had in college, some of the people that I worked with when I worked at in St. Louis State Hospital. The techniques that they had tried to perfect in their wildest Bengali type dreams takes time. So, I tried to look at that, and in the book breakdown, I go into the history of sensory deprivation as a precursor to the MK Ultra studies. The sensory deprivation is a long process, and Ewan Cameron really perfected that process that he called psychic driving, which was in his mind a way to eradicate, to mentally cleanse people, and to replace their thoughts with implanted thoughts that he, as the creator, as the big brother, would control these thoughts and play them into the inductees' ears until he had replaced their other values, thoughts, and cognitions. So it was a long process.
It's an extraordinary development. So much information and stories to cross weave with how you've described it there. What we'll do is we'll take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll continue, because you brought up a few other things that I'd like to explore. Don't go anywhere. You're watching The 51st State.
Australian National Review is Australia's first real free and independent press. One with no editorial control by the elite, but a publication that can generate critical thinkers and critical debate, and hold those spreading mistruths and deliberate propaganda in mainstream media to account. News with a difference that will be educational, compelling, and create a platform for political and social change in this country, and address the real issues facing this country and the world.
And welcome back to the 51st State. My guest this hour, Dr. John Brady. John, you have more than blown my mind with the number of developments in the last segment. It's just extraordinary. I want to pick you up there on something that you mentioned earlier. You said the Rosicrucians. Can you explain a little bit more about Sirhan's involvement there? Because this is a controversial group that's been brought up a little bit in the past with people that I've interviewed who have been who've mentioned mind control, but also there was a big case recently in Australia where the Rosicrucians have gone after someone on a civil case for defamation. So where's the connection with Sirhan?
They're in San Jose. That's where I practice. The Rosicrucians, you know, their main temple is in San Jose, just coincidentally. So with the Rosicrucians, with Sirhan, he was attempting to engage in occult type behaviors. He was trying to figure out the ultimate question, which is he perceived something was wrong with him, but he didn't know what it was, and he didn't trust professionals. He didn't trust professionals like myself or Dr. Diamond. He had antipathy, particularly towards Jewish doctors during the trial. So he wanted to understand his own psychopathology that was very difficult to understand because it was enmeshed in his subconscious. His internecine bad behavior was buried and not available on a surface level, as RFK Jr. found out that the person that he was talking to wasn't the person that killed his father, and I agree with him. It was the other personality. So with Sirhan, he's continually trying to explore new ways to deal with his own feelings of ennui, uneasiness, and anxiety. He turns to the occult. He begins an extensive reading program and a self-improvement program. Part of that involved his membership in the Rosicrucians. He used the Rosicrucians in order to self-hypnotize using candles, using various techniques to alter his personality to reach a different level of his own awareness. So he tried mental telepathy. He thought he could transfer thoughts from one person to another, so he tried to project thought from himself to his mother. He tried to engage in transfer of information from the Rosicrucians into his mindset that would clarify his murky understanding of who he was. He tried to engage in telekinesis, where he thought he could move objects. Particularly, this was a fishing lure that was suspended from the ceiling in his bedroom, and he thought by thought control he could begin to move this pendulum back and forth. So he was constantly trying to actually condition himself to deal with the ultimate question of who am I and why do I have these strange thoughts. He thought he could change the color of candlelight from blue to yellow to green to whatever. So he practiced doing that in his bedroom, and these experiences then were he designed these to clarify regions of his mind, the multiple personality type that he couldn't figure out. So in the process, he self-conditions himself to be very susceptible to hypnosis. Later, after the murder, when he's interviewed by Dr. Diamond, he becomes a very easy subject to hypnotize because he's got this Rosicrucian experience. He's got this meditation experience. He has all this self-taught occult information that kind of ties back into hypnosis. So Dr. Diamond finds him a very suitable and apt candidate to try and tap into the second personality, which Dr. Diamond does.
Now, a couple of years ago, an article appeared in the ABC, that's Australia's government media, broadcaster, etc. And it was written by a young fellow who wrote the story of he'd uncovered that the CIA had brought MK Ultra to Australia with psychiatrist Dr. Martin Orne, spelled O-R-N-E.
Yes.
Now, I managed to contact this particular journalist who confirmed everything in the article, but he said that it didn't work and it didn't get very far, and that was the end of it. Now, I've happened to interview a number of people who said that they were part of this MK Ultra program in Australia that was involved with Sydney University, and their stories corroborate the same people were involved, the same practices were involved, etc. Given your description, therefore, of what you've just mentioned there, and this self-hypnosis, etc., and this suggestion, does it stand to reason that MK Ultra could therefore have been extrapolated into a program that was perhaps mass produced at some stage?
Well, the proliferation of MK Ultra, I mean, was not only evident in the United States, Canada, but also in the UK, and I'm not surprised to find out that it was operating in Australia. So there was international connection between these people that were all funded by the same organization through the CIA funding program, through various front organizations that were supposedly altruistic organizations to help people. One was called the Ecology Fund, or the Self-Awareness Fund, which was kind of paradoxical, because that was the last thing these people were interested. They were interested in mind control. So the international notion of this has always been perpetuated by biopsychiatrists who, from the early 19th century, had a fantasy that they could create a self-described robot as a person that they could control. So this was a very popular European thought, basically promulgated in Italy by Cesare Lombroso, who was a major force in criminology that wanted to demonstrate through certain kinds of techniques that people could be controlled. The Lombrosian theory dominated European criminology for 30 or 40 years, and then it spread to the United States. The next wave came with some Italian researchers, Cerlini and Bini, who B-I-N-I, not beans, but Bini, that developed certain kinds of primitive psychosurgery experiments where they could control people's behavior. This was followed by the Spanish neurosurgeon Delgado, who implanted these into the limbic system of a bull. He would implant this radio. You know the study, probably. You're shaking your head.
I'm just I'm just gathering the thoughts. I mean, it's just incredible the amount of detail.
So
Keep going, please.
Delgado would implant a radio sensitive device in the amygdala area of a bull. So the bull at full charge, once Delgado would stimulate this, activate this, the bull would stop in mid-charge. So if he would release it, then the bull would continue on with what bulls do. So it was a very interesting situation where, move forward then 10 years, people thought that they could do this with neurosurgery, they could do it with implants, that there was some elementary reasoning done by a doctor named Lawrence that Sirhan was controlled by a similar radio control device that Delgado used, and that's why he was then conditioned to. They activated it, and then Sirhan began firing at Senator Kennedy. So these what I'm trying to clarify is that these dreams of mind control extend back a long time. The critical question is, what studies, and I said this before, what studies verify that I can get you to do something against your will if you're a good hypnotic subject? And I know of those studies that are empirical, repeated studies. Replication is one of the most important parts of studies, not anecdotal, but real studies to show that people were controlled.
So therefore, the science backs up the fact that MK Ultra, as alleged the victims that there are, and they call themselves victims, obviously, that it truly exists.
John, I mean, there's many, there's many patients that came through Cameron's shop at McGill University in Montreal, became vegetabilized based on the kind of treatment that he meted out to them. One particular lawsuit, it's not that old, actually, what was engaged in by a man named Harvey Weinstein, not the movie guy. This is a different Harvey Weinstein, same name, same spelling, who went into the Allen Memorial Hospital to see Cameron with mild depression. Long story. He came out pretty much vegetabilized based on the kind of mind control research, kind of electroconvulsive shock therapy that was administered to him, plus Cameron's bottom line philosophy based on what's called psychic driving. That I, as the God player, can replace your thoughts using, these elongated techniques that he thought could be realized from Aldous Huxley, who had fantasized about what he called hypnopedia, which was the replacement of thoughts with earphones, bombarding somebody with propaganda so they would see things the way that the tape said. So you jump from Aldous Huxley to you and Cameron. Cameron thinks, we're going to psychically drive. We're going to cleanse these people's thoughts, and we're going to give them new thoughts. And that's what he did with the earphones on for hours and hours during these sensory deprivation studies. Harvey Weinstein just became collateral damage in the equation, and his family became livid, and they walked away with millions of dollars before they closed down this insane asylum that Cameron was operating in Canada. Unfortunately, there were many other ones, including UK, including perhaps in Australia and other places. So, these studies of mind control, as I said, permeated the minds of the biopsychiatrists for the past 200 years, as far as I can see.
It is such a massive story and unknown and not addressed. And only recently interviewing Kathy O'Brien, who explained that her connection was trauma-based, and so this dissociative state there. Now, in your bio, right, I read out I read out that you talked about impulsive control disorders, including sexual molestation. Now, I know that it's an uncomfortable subject for many, but this is something that continues to come up, and people such as Kathy explain that they were used as sex slaves to very powerful people. Can you explain
Sure.
that concept?
It's a pretty interesting story.
It's I mean, it's devastating for the victims, of course, but the fact is that seems to be a customer base for what I would describe in the modern world is something that you would expect that you saw in the TV series Westworld. And I don't mean to make these references to Hollywood, but that's an example of a robotic designed human-looking creature that is there for the pleasure of human beings that want to indulge in such a thing. But before we get to a Westworld, which kind of feels like we're on our way there with the idea of AI and people trying to put chips in their head to get some sort of competitive advantage. But before we get there, where we're dealing with this process here of mind control, trauma-based and sexual molestation, what is the connection, therefore, in the work that you've done and cases of these types of people, these victims?
Well, I mean, I've probably treated 200 sex offenders, testified in either prosecution or the defense based on these people's proclivities towards an attraction to minors, to children, for example. So until 20 years ago, there wasn't any definitive way to really analyze a person's deviant sexual fantasies. The most important characteristic is not the number of occasions that a person engages in untoward sexual behavior. It's the number of deviant fantasies that person creates. So about 1993 or 4, a psychiatrist came up with a visual test that could measure deviant sexual interest that a defendant, let's say, that a defendant might have towards a group of people, a select group, which would be minors, children of a certain age, certain body type, certain size, a preference where they are below their level of awareness. They're just looking at photos. But the test, as I'm looking at your eyes, measures the degree and the intensity and the time that they're focusing on that image. When they focus on that image, that's a reflection of their deviant sexual fantasies that can translate into a motoric or an actual behavior where they engage in molestation. So this is kind of a breakthrough. When we look at somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, obviously a molester, a person who had taken advantage of young women for probably 25 years, as a ready-made predator, then he encourages his sidekick, Ghislaine Maxwell, to help him procure these young women. So if he were alive, we could test him and see the preponderance of his deviant sexual fantasies sustaining the underlying behavior, which is this drive towards sexual gratification. So the experience that I've had, in many court cases, testifying for both the defense and the prosecution, is this particular substrate of thought and fantasy, is this impossible to reverse, or can we reverse this and to make this person more amenable to as a member of society?
So given that, are these people treatable, or is this a write-off at this point that they're not possibly reversible?
Well, I'm sure they're treatable if you can interrupt their pattern of deviance at a certain point where it doesn't become oriented towards homicide. Obviously, with Jeffrey Epstein, I mean, he was a pedophilic offender. He was an opportunist. he was a ritualistic offender who had things ordered for himself before he could engage in this kind of behavior. In a sense, Epstein was a lot like P. Diddy, who also had a ritualistic, not just the baby oil, but other steps that he took with the people that procured the women for him, although they were mostly adult people. But the ritualism was there, and Epstein had this ritualistic behavior of what would happen when Maxwell would procure these women and set them up for his predation.
Now, given where we are historically right now, that there are many people that have been following the Epstein story for a decade at least, and that would be myself, amongst many, many others. But it's only in very recent history that Democrat supporters have finally come out and they've called for the release of these so-called Epstein files. And it's my suspicion that it's because they smell Donald Trump blood in the water and are desperate for a connection to take out President Trump. That aside, my point is that the whole world is now calling for more information. Given what you've described and given perhaps what you've seen in the news and our conversation today, do you support the idea of the Epstein files being released and let the chips fall where they may? Would you be surprised or not surprised if there were big names included here and many people were not just embarrassed, but were actually having to answer for crimes against children?
Yeah, I think you just, that's a very good point. I think if you look at Victoria Giuffre, Australian case, actually she's from Sacramento, California, is where she was born. Okay, so she wanted total disclosure. Whether the Democrats or the Republicans or both want disclosure, yeah, I think it's really important to piece together more threads of the story of how this guy became this a pervert starting early in his life when he chose to victimize young women and how he could get away with it. So, I mean, my thrust would be towards, as I said before, towards analyzing his deviant sexual fantasy patterning. When did this happen? When did he develop this? Some people call it a processing error, where the natural transition in puberty, when you shift your attention from children same age to adults same age. So there's something that happens in that stage of development where you become arrested and you can't move on, plus the fact of trauma, plus other issues like with Giuffre. She was obviously, a troubled person going into it, drug user, abandoned, run away from Sacramento, lots of stuff. And then she ends up, of all places, in Mar-a-Lago as a massage assistant. And here comes Ghislaine Maxwell, hi, honey, how are you? Would you like to travel? How about Paris? Would you like to see Paris? You want to go to Spain? You want to go to Europe? And Giuffre's this innocent, 17-year-old. 16 or 17-year-olds, what does she know about anything? Not much. So she takes the bait. She becomes a victim. Prince Edward, Andrew, he factors into the picture. It just goes on and on. But the answer to your question is, yeah, I think it would be helpful to understand why the original 2008 agreement with the Florida assistant U.S. attorney Acosta, why he made the deal to give this guy a sweetheart sentence that allowed him to go home at night and to return during the day or whatever the arrangements were. It was a slap on the wrist rather than imposing the real sentence. So Acosta says that he was advised by people above him that this guy had a lot of information. He was connected to other people, and so he went light on the sentencing.
He did make the point, didn't he, that he was an intelligence asset at that stage. That was Alex
Who knows?
Acosta.
Everybody is. I mean, maybe Ghislaine is. Her father certainly was. I mean, he was he was as controversial as Epstein, maybe even more so. So who knows what happened to Robert Maxwell? Who knows where he got his money? Who knows if he was an arms dealer? I mean, it's all these threads. What I'd like to focus on is, how did Ghislaine Maxwell come under the control of Epstein to become his procurer of women?
Yes, okay. Yes.
So how does she transfer this allegiance from her father, who she was obviously his favorite and the last child of 7 children, I believe? How did she deal with his death as a traumatic experience? Because she loved him, she worshiped him, she worked for him, she would do anything to please him. I don't know if there was anything sexual involved. Could have been. I don't really know. But she did everything. She satellized with him 100%. He's taken out of the picture in 91. She gravitates to New York, and she meets Svengali number 2, Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein may have victimized her. Maybe he was more perceptive than she was. He could see that she was a wounded bird and would be of help to him. So he entices her into his schema, into his plan to get women, and she becomes his paramour, his lover, his assistant, 100%. He's taken out of the picture in 91. She gravitates to New York, and she meets Svengali number 2, Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein may have victimized her. Maybe he was more perceptive than she was. He could see that she was a wounded bird and would be of help to him. So he entices her into his schema, into his plan to get women, and she becomes his paramour, his lover, his assistant, his controlled person for 20 years. It's a pretty interesting story.
It's one of the most gripping long-term stories that you could ever imagine, because I was just watching a clip the other day, Eric Weinstein on a podcast explaining. He was saying that he'd met Epstein. He said he was a currency trader. I couldn't believe that he was a currency trader. I question where his money came from. You might say Les Wexner, but he says, where did the Robert Maxwell money go, and how did Epstein get that money? So maybe it's the same money circling through intelligence agencies. That was one part of it. The question I've got, probably to conclude where we are today, to sum it all up, what makes a certain victim become a perpetrator and another victim resist and say, this will never happen to another human being again, as to what happened to me? What's the difference in the two people?
Okay, so we talked about Anna Freud, right? Okay, so who was Anna Freud?
So this is the relative to Sigmund Freud,
right?
Related back to when you're talking about World War II and Nazis and capos and that behavior.
Go. There's your answer. So what go ahead.
So it's learned behavior, and it's a way to identify with the captor.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's one of the most salient features of child molesters is their own history. I used to have defense attorneys that would say, Bob was a victim of sexual assault, rape when he was 10, so that's probably good. And I'd say, no, counselor, you got it just the opposite. The propensity towards adult sexual offending, if you're a victim, is like 80% greater than not. So it's a process where, as you say, with Anna Freud, the identification with the aggressor becomes very actualized, and the person does to other people exactly what was done to them. So it's kind of in a way like the Stockholm syndrome, or a paradoxical affiliation with the aggressor, that the person begins to act out those things that they resent the most about the person that has mistreated them. Sirhan falls into the same category, that these people that mistreated him, he misperceives the value of that, includes it in his subconscious personality, finds a target, and then acts out on it.
I was going to conclude there. I can't help it. I've got to ask you one more question, because when we bring Anna Freud and we mention capos, there's a very famous 60 Minutes interview with George Soros, and in it he's asked about his behaviour during the World War II, and he effectively is asked the same question about his behaviour, and he says, "Yes, I was only 14, but effectively he admits to helping the Nazis, which makes him a capo at the age of 14." Therefore, watching Soros over the years, now in his 90s, this man seems to tick every box of an apex predator. The way that he deals with countries, the way he's made his wealth, the way that he throws his money around and pretends to be a servant of America, and yet it's open borders, everything, open societies, everything that is the antithesis of the land of the free and the home of the brave is George Soros and an apex predator. Therefore, and it's very impossible to conclude this, but it just seems that something has happened to Soros, whether or not it was his decision to become a capo during World War II, or something before that, to become that type of what appears to be public enemy number one.
Yeah, I think there's probably unresolved psychiatric issues there with his identification with the aggressor that he really never resolved entirely, which leads to a life based on his own assumptions that he's in control of everything, that this won't recur. This is the other side of the identification with the aggressor, is that this stuff will not recur in my life. I'll control everything. He becomes almost a universal anarchist, money launderer, taking down the pound sterling, whatever he did, as this really sensitive 14-year-old Hungarian Jew who suddenly identifies with all the bad things in society. He's probably never had this thing cleansed out of his mind, what really happened to him. I mean, I've seen him interviewed. He's highly articulate, extremely smart, great mathematician. I mean, I was amazed at some of the answers that he came up. No psychological answers, only linear cognitions, only linear information concerning money and the stuff that you mentioned. But probably the genesis of this anarchy and this attack goes back to what happened to him and his surrender of himself. He surrenders himself to the occupiers, to the controllers, and he becomes, as you say, a capo himself. I didn't know that. It's very, very intriguing to understand that.
Because yesterday, speaking with Kathy O'Brien, and she made the point also, she mentioned this term linear. And then she said, and it's the same behavior, almost like it's an artificial intelligence. And as she described the people that abused her and used the term linear, she said it wasn't emotional. It wasn't the way that we would think it. It just had a completely different behavior. John, the comparisons that you've been able to make, it's almost as if I could run the two interviews side by side for people to watch and to explore an actual victim versus an actual expert in the field. It has been an extraordinary interview today. I just blown away by so many things that you've been able to piece together, put together, and explain in terms that I think will be invaluable for years to come for people that are only going to come and discover and ask questions about what has just happened over the last 25 years, because the world is about to change. It seems that all paths are leading to a singularity of truth and discovery happening. And here you are. We are blessed to have you on the 51st State today. It has been an absolute thrill. Thank you so much for your time.
So that means I've got to send you a couple of books.
Well, I'll tell you one thing right now. I'm going to put up on the screen. This is the book that I can't wait to get my hands on, Psychological DNA, a cold case analysis for who killed RFK. But also, I'm going to put up on the screen for you now. This is some other books that John has written there. Why Rich Women Shoplift When They Have It All, and Treat Me Right, again written by John Brady. There's a couple more to check out, and you can check them out on Amazon, amongst other places. And John, could you please give me your email address, your website address for people to go and have a look at?
Just Dr. John C. Brady, or on LinkedIn or Facebook, or my publisher, Trine Day, Trine Day. Do you know Trine Day?
I do know Trine Day. They are a wonderful publisher. I've interviewed several authors, and the books that they publish are just incredible. So you're in very good hands with Trine Day, John.
Yeah, they're wonderful. So if people have an interest, they can say I was on the 51st state. They get 10% off, and we can make a deal.
There you go. I love it. Well, that is wonderful for everyone. Thanks so much, John. We'll end our interview there.
Thank you so much. We'll talk again.
Absolutely. We will end our interview there today, and please check out other interviews available at anr.news, or check out the X handle, the ANR Headlines. You can check me out on X at JasonQCitizen1, and of course you can go to my page at channel51.com.au, or also qcitizen.net. There's a whole lot of information out there for you. We'll see you all on the next show.